Welcome to DISCERN. I'm Mark Matthews, joined again by Nick Pitts, fellow from the Institute for Global Engagement. Nick, good to see you. Thanks for joining us again.
Hey, great to be with you, Mark.
So we're going to continue on this COVID-19 train that we've been talking about. And today I wanted to talk specifically about an article that was in the Christianity Today magazine where they unpacked this trend of religious funerals coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic. So a couple of facts. According to preliminary data from the Centers for Disease Control, about 570,000 more people died in 2020 than in 2019. I think now we're up to close to 850,000 people that have died, at least in some way attributed to COVID-19, which is more than died in the Civil War, which is just kind of an incredible statistic. But one thing that we're seeing, and we've talked a lot about how COVID has impacted religious behavior and things like that. We recently talked on DISCERN about how church attendance has actually gone down over the last 2 years. But this article talks about how the trend for religious-based funerals is going up. And so, Nick, I'm just curious, what do you think? You know, I know we're winding down, hopefully, in this pandemic, and there are going to be lots of studies about the impact, but particularly to religion and Christianity specifically. What do you think the trends coming out of COVID are going to be?
There's just a little bit of glimmer of light of what we're seeing relative to funerals in the study that you're alluding to. If we go back before the pandemic, what you saw is that approximately 35% of Americans 40 and older said that it was important or very important for religion to be a part of a funeral service. In 2021, that number had jumped 12% to 47% now. It's the first time it's ever jumped, much less gone up by double digits. And so what we're seeing is this growing tide of individuals as they're coming to the end of their days and their families are attempting to grieve and to begin to make the next steps without these individuals, are wanting religion to be a part of the funeral service. But it also reflects it's another interesting study out of Pew that was happening at the very beginning of this pandemic. What it found is that, yes, there were lower numbers of individuals that were participating in religious services on a weekly basis. But what we're seeing is that 25% of Americans said their faith has been made stronger because of this pandemic. Individuals are having to grapple with who God is and are his promises true. And what we're continuing to see is that in the midst of this pandemic, people are saying, yes, my faith is stronger. And yes, at the end of days, I want religion to be a part of that service that helps me to be able to grieve. As we know what the teacher in Ecclesiastes 7 says, it's better to go into the house of mourning. Why? Because that person of mourning knows that in the twinkling of an eye, this person is going to be experiencing something far greater than they could ever imagine.
That's incredible. I think there's a way, I guess, to reconcile in a sense where if things like church attendance, which would be more outward, more kind of based on either a particular habit that you might be, a family habit, a family tradition, things like that, you could see those things starting to die off and becoming less important in the midst of a pandemic or something like this. But where the rubber meets the road, for example, or where things really matter, people talking about their faith growing, or ultimately, what their final destination might be in eternity, things like that are trending upward, which I think, like you said, is an encouraging thing as far as people of faith or Christians specifically.
Yeah, what we continue to see in the research is just abundantly clear, whether it's through Pew or whether it's through a Gallup study, that was particularly captivating, especially for Christians. And so this Gallup study found that individuals, as we would expect, are suffering great detriment relative to their mental health right now during this pandemic. And it didn't matter if you were male or female, Democrat or Republican, single or married. Everyone, when they polled before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, everyone had gone down, every demographic except for one demographic where individuals said that their mental health had decreased. There was only one demographic in which it went up. And that one demographic was individuals that claimed a religious background. Individuals that are religious by nature have a keen understanding that this world is not perfect, that it's a broken world, but they also follow after a broken Savior. that helps them to make sense of the brokenness that they find themselves in pain. It reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote. He says that God's never promised us a comfortable life, but he did promise to comfort us in this life.
That's really good. So you're saying that by having any sort of religious affiliation, that understanding of either a greater power or that understanding that there's more going on than we might understand or might see, that has actually been an indicator of either a stable or an increase in positive mental health?
Yeah, what we're continuing to see is that individuals that are religious by nature, it's just advantageous to the human life to be practicing, having religious rituals and being a part of a religious community. This isn't just relative to mental health during the pandemic. We've known this through a whole body of research. The individuals that are religious by nature traditionally have stronger marriages. They're traditionally better parents. They traditionally have better financial stewardship and just have a better financial picture. These are individuals that typically do better at their jobs just because of some of the principles that are usually associated with religion and the communities that religious people tend to incorporate in. There's a sense of accountability of holding yourself to a higher standard that typically tends to lead to the flourishment of life.
Well, that's great news. Something I hadn't really thought about, even broader than just the Christian religious ethic, but that this extends out, to others as well. Nick, thanks so much for unpacking that with us today. We're going to continue down this COVID path and talk about different impacts that COVID has had to everyday life. And so we look forward to joining you next time here on DISCERN.